The public imagination is fixated on the kinetic. Hypersonic missiles streaking across continents. That is a terminal phase scenario, the end state of a protocol already in motion. The first strike is not a launch. It is silence. A systemic severing of the adversary's nervous system. According to CSIS analyses, the most critical and most vulnerable infrastructure is not on land. It lies in the deep. This vector targets the undersea cables that carry global data and the satellite constellations that provide reconnaissance. The cyber attack on Poland's power grid, which ESET attributes to the Sandworm Group, was not an isolated event. It was a low-cost probe, a field test of the exact wiper malware required to induce a systemic blackout. The objective is not destruction, but paralysis. The result is a strategic condition we call the blind Leviathan. A global power still possessing overwhelming kinetic force, but with its eyes and ears removed. It cannot verify threats, coordinate a response, or manage its own markets. As the U.S. faces what Forbes terms a dollar crisis and a systemic fiscal crisis, this asymmetric vulnerability becomes the central liability. A blinded hegemon facing internal economic collapse has its options mathematically reduced to a single panicked lever. A kinetic response, triggered not by incoming missiles, but by the terror of absolute silence. The motive for state aggression is rarely strength. It is a calculated response to internal decay. Before a single tank crosses a border, a nation-state first confronts its own balance sheet. When domestic liabilities become unserviceable, unpopular wars, demographic collapse, fiscal insolvency, the leadership faces a mathematical problem. According to analysts at RUSI, the kinetic phase of the Ukraine conflict was, in part, a high-risk maneuver to consolidate domestic control and reset a failing economic trajectory. It was framed as an external operation, but its primary function was to solve an internal solvency crisis. When the kinetic cost of that operation became unsustainable, the strategy was forced to adapt. This is the pivot to asymmetry. A state bled by the high cost of conventional warfare does not surrender. It shifts its vector of attack to a domain where the cost-benefit analysis is inverted. $1 billion buys a finite number of tanks with a high probability of destruction. The same capital can fund years of cyber warfare operations with near zero physical risk and plausible deniability. The attack on Poland's power grid, attributed by ESET to the Russia-aligned Sandworm Group, is not an isolated act of digital vandalism. It is the tactical execution of this pivot. The deployment of the DynaWiper malware is a low-cost probe of a critical NATO liability. It is a field test of asymmetric leverage, designed to inflict economic and psychological damage at a fraction of the cost of a missile strike. This is the protocol. Domestic weakness forces external action. When that action proves too expensive, the state shifts to asymmetric warfare. The objective changes from territorial gain to systemic disruption of the adversary. Economic weakness does not lead to peace. It makes war cheaper and more insidious. The economics of lethality have been inverted. The Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, quantifies this inversion. A $5 million main battle tank can now be neutralized by a $500 drone. This is not a tactical curiosity. It is the mass market democratization of violence. The capacity to project precision, Kinetic force is no longer the exclusive domain of states with trillion-dollar defense budgets. For a hegemon facing a terminal solvency crisis, a vector mapped by current reporting on the U.S. fiscal state and the dollar's stability, this is a mathematical trap. Every billion spent on conventional platforms is a sunk cost against an adversary that can deploy thousands of lethal assets for a fraction of the price. This asymmetric cost curve makes sustained, symmetric warfare economically impossible. When a nation's ability to project power through conventional means is priced out of the market, its response matrix narrows to a single final option: escalation to a higher-order kinetic event to reset the system entirely. The zones of engagement are not the legacy battlefields of the 20th century. The systemic conflict is being staged in proxy laboratories, regions where state capacity is failing. Observe the data. The U.S. issues an updated travel warning for a strategic nation in Asia. This is not a tourism advisory. It is a market indicator of a collapsing security apparatus. These vacuums are not accidental. They are cultivated gray zones, sanctioned by an adversary's cost-benefit analysis. Here, tactics can be tested and perfected at low kinetic cost before being deployed against primary targets. The Poland power grid attack, attributed by ESET to the Sandworm Group, is the graduation of this protocol from the laboratory to live-fire exercise. It is not an act of war. It is a strategic intelligence operation. A Dino Wiper attack is a low-cost probe designed to measure a single metric: NATO's response latency. It tests the digital seams of the alliance, mapping the political will to respond to an attack that sits just below the threshold of conventional retaliation. Each successful probe provides a data point, refining the blueprint for a large-scale systemic disruption. These gray zone operations are not the cause of the conflict. They are a symptom of the core liability. As reports from authorities like Globst and Forbes confirm, the U.S. fiscal crisis and the systemic dollar crisis are the fundamental vulnerability. A hegemon facing a terminal solvency crisis cannot afford to police these proxy laboratories. Its capacity for conventional power projection is mathematically eroding. Adversaries understand this. They are not preparing to fight the U.S. military of 1991. They are staging asymmetric attacks against the insolvent administrative state of today. The gray zones are simply the chessboard on which the opening moves of a solvency-driven conflict are played. The launch on warning doctrine is not a choice. It is a mathematical protocol born from the physics of thermonuclear exchange. The flight time of an ICBM is approximately 30 minutes. After detection, verification, and command authentication, the decision window for a national leader is less than 12 minutes. The protocol is brutally simple. If a massive inbound attack is detected, you launch your own arsenal before enemy warheads arrive and vaporize your capacity to retaliate. Not launching is not an option. It guarantees unilateral destruction. It is a system predicated on the absolute integrity of data from early warning satellites and ground-based radar. This protocol now has a fatal liability. It is called the fog of digital war. An adversary no longer needs to physically destroy a radar installation. They only need to blind it digitally. According to RUSI, the new vector of attack is not kinetic, but informational. A cyber attack can create phantom missile launches, forcing a commander into an impossible choice. Or more strategically, it can blind the system entirely, creating a terrifying silence. In that silence, the protocol's logic becomes an accelerant for crisis. This is not a theoretical exercise. According to security firm ESET, the Dino-Wiper-powered attack on Poland's power grid was attributed to the Russia-aligned Sandworm Group. This was not random vandalism, it was a low-cost probe of NATO's critical infrastructure. CSIS analysis confirms that such attacks are designed to map the response protocols and digital vulnerabilities of a potential adversary. If you can black out a civilian power grid, you can black out a ballistic missile early warning system. You are testing the fuse box of the entire security architecture. Here is the final dilemma. The radar goes dark. The protocol screams that inaction in the face of a potential first strike is suicide. The commander does not know if this is a glitch, a sophisticated hack, or the prelude to an actual launch. But in a state of national fiscal crisis with collapsing solvency, the assumption must be worst case. The enemy is perceived to be exploiting weakness. Fear and protocol merge. The commander is forced to choose between the risk of starting a global war on a false positive or the risk of betting his country's existence that it's a bluff. The fog of digital war mathematically forces the commander's hand towards the launch button. The precedent has been set. The attack on Poland's power grid, attributed by ESET to the Sandworm Group, was not an isolated act of vandalism. It was a low-cost probe of NATO's liabilities. It established a protocol, test a rival's physical infrastructure to measure response time and political cohesion. However, the primary liability of the U.S. is not its grid. It is its solvency. Analysts document the terminal stage of the current system, a declared dollar crisis and an accelerating U.S. fiscal crisis. As a hegemon's financial authority erodes, its capacity for conventional power projection degrades mathematically. Adversaries do not need symmetric force. They only need to accelerate the existing financial decay. The next vector is not physical, but digital financial. The calibration shot will not target a port or a power station. The kinetic cost is too high. The attribution is too simple. The target will be the system's core processing layer. Within the next 12 months, expect a catastrophic, multi-day data corruption event originating from a primary financial data center hub, likely in Northern Virginia. It will not be attributed to a foreign actor, but to a cascading software update failure. The objective is not destruction, but a measurement of the system's response under a liquidity freeze. It is a launch-on warning test for a full-spectrum economic assault.